go. So today, I think we'll have a really nice presentation by Josef Langerman on an overview of Burrows Delta for authorship attribution. Now, let me quickly introduce Josef. Before joining the University of Johannesburg, where he now works, he's had many roles in industry. He's been a member of the IT Executive Committee for the Standard Bank Group. He played many roles in industry over the years, mostly focusing on software development, enterprise architecture, program management, and general management. Now, on the academic side, he obtained his PhD in 2006 with his thesis on the use of multi-agent systems to help solve airline scheduling problems. He was an adjunct lecturer and a professor of practice at the Faculty of Science at UJ before he joined UJ full-time in 2022 in the Department of Applied Information Systems. In October 2024, it was a few months ago, he was appointed head of the Center for Applied Data Science at UJ. But today he will talk about Burrows Delta, his work on Burrows Delta. Let me stop my share and then hopefully Josef, you can take over with the screen share. Very much looking forward to the presentation. We had some issues with screen sharing beforehand. I hope it works now.
Is it there?
I can see it. I can just see the non-presenting presentation.
And now?
All that layout. Yep, that all looks good. Okay, thank you very much, Josef. The virtual floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Menu. So first, when I shared my screen the first time, and said, "Are you sitting in your bedroom?" And that is slightly correct because I'm slumming it a bit. I'm actually at the waterfront in Cape Town, and I'm part of a group of students from University of Manchester showing them Cape Town down one of these international MBA trips. So if I change my screen slightly, you would have actually be able to see the Cape Town harbor. But outside of that, you need to look at me, unfortunately, and my bedroom in the hotel. So like Menu said, I want to talk a bit about stylometry. And the first thing is I'm no expert on this. And I'm going to do two things. The one is a corporate thing. When you've been in corporate most of your life, you do things as corporates do it. And what corporates do is, firstly, they put the punchline up front. Where in academia, normally we do what's the research questions, what's the literature review, what's the process, and then extract the data, then discuss it, and then at the end you have a summary. In corporate, it actually works, you start with a punchline, and then you build up from there to get to the punchline. I'll talk a bit about just who I am, but Menno did most of that. And then what I learned from this Manchester group is after they visit a company or they listen to a lecture, they actually have to reflect and ask three questions. What, so what, and now what? And I actually thought that's quite interesting, and I'm going to use it with my own students, because with those three simple questions, you can actually quite nicely summarize a lecture. And that's what I'm going to just test drive today with you. I'm going to do a bit of corporate, and then I'm going to do what, so what, and now what. So what am I going to tell you today? I'm going to tell you that Burrows Delta, as a way of figuring out who the author of something is, works across most languages, and it works in Afrikaans. So that was the research a grad student and myself did. Afrikaans is very well suited, and we'll get to what this means, the next line, the 50 to 100 most frequently used words, but Afrikaans works well. You can basically figure out the author of something by using 50 to 100 words. And then something that tripped me up for a month or two was be careful with genre. Genre is a great confounder of authorship. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. And that's the punchline. And that looks a bit like a catfish photo because, yeah, I may have a bit of a grin there, but Like Menu said, I'm Josef Langerman. I've actually been a CTO and CIO of Standard Bank for many years, and then I joined academia a couple of years ago. And I'm actually not a digital humanities person, nor am I anything to do with literature or anything like that. And what happened about 2 years ago, I actually wanted to pivot away from all this IT management and software engineering, which I started to find very boring. And I started to look at the digital humanities because I found it fascinating. And then I started to do one or two projects in it. And last year, I think in October, it's the first time we published something small on it at a conference. So this is my journey into the digital humanities. So my first question to you all is, please be gentle on me. I'm not a linguist, I'm a coder. So for me to go into your world is very scary. And so my request is be gentle on me. So let's start with this research interest of mine, which is stylometry, which we, like I said, we started last. What is stylometry? And I learned a lot from this book by Jacques Savoy, Machine Learning Methods for Stylometry. He published that 2 years ago, or now 5 years ago. And let's work from the top. Stylometry is just a method or approach to identify the true author of a doubtful experiment or text excerpt. And when you go through it, you learn that each author has its own style, and statistical or computer-based models can be applied to verify whether or not somebody has written something or not. So people in the past have looked at the Shakespeare plays and tried to see who wrote what. The other big experiment, if you come up with any new algorithm in terms of stylometry, they always test it on the Federalist Papers, which is just a big data set of papers written by the American founding fathers, and you try and use that to see, can you actually cluster them correctly to see who wrote what. And maybe a good question you can write down for me for later is, what's the difference between a statistical method and machine learning and all of those things, and are there differences? So now you say, so okay, this is interesting, but what can we do with it? And there's interesting things you can do with that. So for example, there's a tweet coming out. How do we know if Trump wrote that tweet or some other politician or something like that? We can actually use these methods. And the most famous one where stylometry was used is, as you know, J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter. And then a couple of years later, a new detective series came out by an author called Gail Braith. And it was a nom de plume for somebody nobody knew who it was. And using stylometry techniques, they actually found out it was J.K. Rowling, who wanted to start doing something different and new and didn't want the fame of Harry Potter to cloud a new detective genre. So that actually, stylometry, that put it on the map. And another great use for stylometry is forensics. And with fraud and all of those things, you actually want to see if that mail or that memo was actually forged or not. And then just some examples of how people write differently. And it feels to me a bit like I'm talking to the converted, because as linguists and all of that, you probably know all of this far better than I. If you look there on the left-hand side, you can just see the way those sentences are structured. It has a very different voice. And even if you take dialect into account, people would have different words for post office or different words for different things. So you can see there, just by changing the tense slightly or word choice, make a big difference. And then my favorite is the one there on the left, where you can try and guess, for example, just on that little paragraph there, what the age, the gender, and roughly what year that I'm not sure if that was a tweet, but I think it was a little piece written, what that was. And you can do the same for, so that is a female, quite young, of maybe 5 years ago. And if it was a male writing that, it would look very different. So there's so many interesting things where you can bring in psychology, you can bring linguistics, you can do machine learning, you can bring statistics, you can bring all of those things in to actually make it interesting. And I think what appeals to me about stylometry is not only the intellectual thing about new algorithms and how to do it. You can actually, it's at the crossroads of many fields. Like I said, there's some psychology in there, there's linguistics in there, there's many things in there, and that actually makes it very interesting as a crossroads of different fields. So that is stylometry. And from my own perspective, something that makes stylometry difficult, when you try and use Google Scholar or Scopus, or I'm not sure what databases linguists use always, to find a word for this field is very hard. Some people call it stylometry, some people call it authorship attribution, some people still call it digital humanities. So to find good articles on it is actually quite hard, because I don't think the word stylometry has totally landed yet. And sometimes authorship and those things, or digital authorship or statistical authorship, is either too narrow or too broad. So it's actually quite hard to find things on it. So that's also, if you want to go into this field, try and coin a new term or start using stylometry so that just more people use it, so we can find each other's articles. So now this is interesting. So let's just go to the next one. So just some basic lexical concepts, which again, I'm preaching to the converted. And there's also a bit of statistics in here. Is most of the techniques being used, let me not say, or let's say the statistical techniques uses sometimes Zipf's law. And Zipf's law is a distribution on the right-hand side where a couple of words make up most of the popularity. So if you think of English, was and is and his and her make up the vast majority of the distribution of words. And Zipf's law is actually not limited to linguistics. It's actually used in almost all fields. So when I teach a class in statistics, Zipf's law always comes up, because city sizes, it's like the top 10 cities in the world make up 80% of all city sizes, that type of thing. So it's very closely related to Pareto's law, where 20% of or 80% of the variance or 80% of the impact is actually driven by 20% of things. The other one, which I want to touch on a bit later, is vocab richness, which is also, I specifically kept almost all of the mathematics out of this. So, because I just want to keep it high level, but you can, again, Google all of this and you can find the formulas for it. Vocab richness just means how many different words do you use across 100 words or 1,000 words. So if a corpus is, or a piece of text is 10,000 words, how many different types of words do you use there? And very interestingly, authors have very different vocab richness indicators. So Zipf's law and vocab richness is mostly used to look at who authored what. So keep in mind, and like I said, I'm sure it's not news to you, Zipf's law is quite important, and that distribution, almost everything I've seen in literature follows that rule. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So here's Burrows Delta. So again, this is the first slide with maths on. And again, don't panic. I don't understand this maths. And I will talk a little bit about the tools later, why you don't need to understand the maths. But I also thought it would be a bit disingenuous of me if I don't talk how the method works under the hood. So basically what Burrows Delta does is it looks at the frequency of words between different authors and uses the distance between those words to basically come up with what should be clustered together. So that top one, you can see Jane Eyre and Shirley, and they just compare the relative frequencies of words of the same word or bag of words between those two books, and then try and make a decision, are they done by the same? They use this thing called the Z-score, which you shouldn't break your heads about. It is just basically a Z-score is how far something is from the median or the mean. And the other thing, when you start delving under the hood, you can measure the distance between words or bags of words in a couple of ways. There's three. There's a cosine. So if you look at A and B there, the distance between them could just be, if you remember your grade 12 maths, the cosine distance, which is just the angle between them, or you can measure the direct path length, which is the Euclidean distance, or something which is quite different is the Manhattan difference. If this was a city block and you need to walk those blocks, what would the distance be? And all of those are just different ways of measuring distance. And again, if you sit here, you can say, yo, what nonsense. How do I pick which distance to use? Does it even matter? Or you can ask yourself, how many words should I compare? Is 10 enough? Is 50 enough? Is 100 enough? And if I pick a different one, will it change the answer? So maybe that's good questions you can also keep for the end. But again, what I want you to take from this slide is we're comparing the amount, or it's called a frequency in statistics, of how many times certain words are used, and we compare it between authors. That comparison is sometimes called a distance, and you can tell your friendly Python or R algorithm which you're using to pick which one you want to use. And again, ask the question there, which one is better? So that is just Burrows Delta at a very high level. And the first example I'm going to use of where Burrows Delta has been used, and this was my first project, when I tried to get to see, can I do the epistles? Oh, not can I do the epistles, can I do authorship attribution? I actually have a bit of an interest in ancient Greek. So 10, 15 years ago, I felt bored for some other strange reason, and I'm a scientist. And I thought, I wonder what it would feel like to be able to read Greek, you know, like Plato or Aristotle or the Greek New Testament or something like that. And I thought, oh, this is going to be cookies and cream. This is easy. I can do math. I can do all of this stuff. How hard can this be? And I enrolled at UNISA, and I enrolled for Ancient Greek 1. And I have to say, it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my whole life. It was Greek 1 for me was harder than a PhD. So, but what was good, I was the only one who actually passed the course in the end. And then in my second year Greek, I actually had to change universities because UNISA didn't do Greek 2. So I went to UJ, and I was the only undergrad student between Greek 1, 2, and 3, the only one. So my reading lessons were in the professor's house. So we sat there and did some reading. So needless to say, I still can't really read Greek. If I don't have a dictionary with me, I probably won't be able to read anything. And if I don't have a passing chart or some reference to the grammar, I probably also won't do it. So please, when I talk to you about ancient Greek, I am by no means fluent or an expert or anything, but at least it makes great party conversations if you can say you can read a bit of Greek. So the problem I tried to look at after my illustrious Greek beginnings was just to see who wrote the Pauline epistles in the Bible. So there's 21 books in the Greek New Testament, which was allegedly written by either Paul or James or Peter or John. And normally in the epilogue, it says this is a letter from Paul, a servant of God, to the church in Corinthians or Galatia or Ephesus. And as we know, people write in other people's name. We also write for certain theological points. People would attribute Paul to their letters. So there's this big debate in biblical studies on who wrote what. And I thought, I wonder if we can do some stylometry on it. And it was more of a exercise for me to test my training wheels. So all that this slide shows you are the books in the Greek New Testament. You can see the size in lexims or words and how they differs from English. So you can actually see that Greek is quite a tight language. And if you compare it to Latin, Latin is actually even tighter than Greek. So it just gives you a sense of what we were looking at, and we wanted to see which cluster together. Now, for you, if you don't know what Greek looks like, this is Koine Greek. Koine Greek is the Greek Alexander spoke, and it actually was used 2000 years ago as the lingua franca, actually, of almost the whole Western Roman Empire. That what you see there in arche hen ho logos, kai ho logos, en prostontion, kai theos hen ho logos. My Greek professor will probably turn over, not that he's dead in his grave, if he was dead, if he that pronunciation, but this is John 1:1 in the Greek New Testament. But it just gives you a sense of what it looks like. So what can we come up? And this is work, oh, I forgot to put the source in here. This is the works avoided. My own, when I did this, it came to the same thing. And what it does there is you can see clusters of books go together. And remember, we said we first measure the distance between books, and we use Burrows Delta for that. So you generate a Burrows Delta for each book, and then you work out the distance between different books. And what you can see here, people generally use tree diagrams to show the distances. So you can see little Jude there at the top is on its own, so we know probably the author of the so-called Jude. So only one that you can see the Johns, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John cluster together. Then you have that big cluster at the bottom, which goes together. And again, now this is a stylistic question. Do I take that big cluster that's down there and break it into 3 clusters? Because you can see 3 clusters there, where the Timothys and Colossians and Ephesians go together. There's one in the middle and one on the side. And I think this is probably, if I can leave you, and because you probably from different faculties, you know this better than my students in science, is if you do these types of things with any grounding theory, you will be lost. Because what I see a lot is science students or math students writing papers say we found a correlation between mental health and or predictors of mental health. And all they do is they run algorithms like this to see where the correlations are. They are not a doctor. They've never looked at mental health in their life, but we published suddenly on that. And the American Statistical Association in 2019 actually put a paper out and said, do not write on stuff, if you're a statistician or a computer science, if you do not have some grounding in that field. So what you see here, there's no way for us to interpret this tree diagram if we do not have a theory. And for authorship in the New Testament, there's 7 or 8 authorship theories. There's Bauer and a couple of others. And the most you can do with this is to look at those theories and say, this fits one of those theories, because those theories are based on qualitative data. It's also based on years books are written in. There's theological arguments. There's cohesiveness of arguments, all of that. So you need some or other qualitative theory to guide your statistical thinking. And in my opinion, statistics and machine learning should confirm your qualitative things, or the other way around. If you come up with something like this and there's a great theory, see that at least both qualitative and quantitative work together. Please do not go and look at the tools I'll give you at the end, run something on something, and then come up, oh, I found a new theory. You almost need to start with it too, and it needs to be grounded in the history of that field as well. So that's a topic I actually feel passionate about, because suddenly in my field, I see a lot of people thinking that machine learning and statistics will rule the world and we don't need any of these other things. So on to Afrikaans. So after I saw I could do that, then I saw somebody else publish already on it, Savoy, and I actually phoned Savoy and we had a chat about it. And there were some issues there as well, which we can touch on the end. Is my results using exactly the same thing was different to Savoy's, and neither he nor I could work out why. It was a full difference. It was just one book who clustered differently, and we couldn't figure out why. Then my question is, when we publish on these things, how will we actually know that under the hood, these algorithm and things we use are actually all the same? So on to Afrikaans. Beginning last year, I had a grad student who said, do I have a topic for him? And so let's just check if Delta Burrows works on Afrikaans, because most literature says it works on almost all of the languages, but we've never tested it on Afrikaans. So we started with Afrikaans, and there you can see some authors of some books. And what we wanted to do is that all of the Dion Meyers, if we take that Cobra of Dion Meyer, the test case, if we compare it to the other Dion Meyers, can we see it's the same author? And luckily to say, yes, it works. So Delta Burrows works very well on Afrikaans. And remember in the beginning, I spoke a bit about richness or type token ratio or richness of language. There you can also see different Afrikaans authors, how rich their language is. And you can see Irma Venter is the least rich, and Chris Carsten actually uses the most varied vocab across 1,000 words. We lost our way actually in the beginning of this research, because the student here, Previn Govender, you can see there in the citation at the bottom, he's actually an Indian guy and has never done Afrikaans. So he downloaded and found some Afrikaans poetry. And for the life of him, he couldn't get Delta Burrows to work on poetry and test cases in different novels. And when I looked at it, I actually told him, dude, what's happening here is you cannot compare across genre. When somebody, even if Chris Carsten writes a poem, his vocab would be very different to when he writes a spy novel versus a newspaper article. And I think that was well founded in linguistics, which we were computer science didn't know, that genre is almost a bigger indicator of stylometry than author. So you need to control for genre when you do this. So that was, and I know you're probably all chuckling in your sleeves. How can they make a mistake like that? But hindsight is always 2020. So I thought I will own up to our mistakes, because I also see that doesn't happen often in academia, where people say, what did I struggle with? So we struggled with genre. And yeah, so that's what we proved in for Afrikaans, and it worked well. And I was very pleased, and we just did a small little conference paper on that. When was this? 2 months ago. Yeah, so that is Afrikaans. Now, that heading of the slide is wrong. So we had two research questions for this paper. Is Burrows Delta effective on Afrikaans, on an Afrikaans corpus? And we can say yes. And there you can see the delta scores per author of those different books, and you can see that worked well. And then here's a difficult question. Does accuracy improve with a higher number of MFWs? That's just basically how many words do I compare. When you write these algorithms, you can say, use the top 50 words, use the top 100 words, use the top 200 words, use the top 1,000 words. And you saw from Zipf's law that it actually drops quite quickly. Literature tells us that Burrows Delta loses any differentiable improvement after about 150 words. What we found across those different novels was that in Afrikaans, you can probably get away between 50 and 100 words, and that accuracy does not really improve after about 100 words. And why is that important? Because you can now say, just use as many words as you want. That's true, but it takes computing power. If you run in the cloud or somewhere where you pay for that computing power, it is better to use an efficient algorithm which will give you the correct answer quicker. The more accurate answer of 10,000 words or 100,000 words is almost not worth it in terms of computing power. So that's what we found. Some tools. Now you might sit there and say, okay, I wonder, maybe I should go a bit deeper into it. There's a really nice website which I started on, which is called the Programming Historian. And it's actually peer reviewed, and it is, I thought it was quite well done, where they take you through digital humanities and they teach you a couple of techniques. They have a whole lecture on stylometry, and they even give you code snippets and explain the maths in a very simple way. And it's based mostly on Python. So what I would suggest, if you want to get into it, go do one of Menno's or online R course or a Python course. Go to this Programming Historian website and just run some of the stuff and see if you can get some of the same results as what people have published. That will be your training wheels, and then move on to your own work on it. A book I found very helpful, but this is now probably after you've been doing this for a while, is Machine Learning Methods for Stylometry, which is, it has a lot of maths. And but if you just keep the maths out of it and read the descriptions, it would give you enough pointers and things to actually go look it up, see what you want to learn from it. So I found that book incredibly useful. And Jacques Savoy is also a very nice guy. If you phone him up or mail him, he will always come back to you and help you. He actually spends half of his time in Canada and the other half of his time in Switzerland. So try and catch him between one or two of those countries. He's actually retired from 3 or 4 years ago. So, but he's still quite active and wants to stay involved. So my next steps, which is the so what for me personally, is, and this is maybe things for you. Can we apply this to other African languages? If Julius Malema or Cyril Ramaphosa puts out a tweet in an indigenous language, can we actually apply Burrows Delta to it? I don't know. I would guess for sure we can. Most literature says we can, but no research has been done. This is pretty simple research, and I'm sure if you start now, you can have all of this done by April or May if you apply your mind. And the other thing I personally want to look at is what I've shown you now. Burrows Delta is basically a statistical technique. There's more and more machine learning things that comes out each year. And I just want to start seeing what are the differences between the two, which ones are more effective. My personal view is actually the old-fashioned statistics is far more efficient, and it just does as well as the machine learning things, but I don't know. And that's what I want to look at. And ladies and gents, please don't ask difficult questions, but please ask a question. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Joseph. This is quite interesting. I see, I have a few questions, but I also see that Tanya had a question that's kind of related to your last question, or one of your last questions. So do you think Burrows Delta would also work on, for example, Zulu or Sotho, Sotho? Because these have a different kind of linguistic structure, right?
So what they found in the research or the literature I've surveyed, it works on Chinese, it works on Tibetan, it works on almost most languages. So I would guess it would definitely work on it, but we haven't tested it. So I think I've just done the little test on Afrikaans, and I would love for the other 11 languages to be done. And so for sure, I think it would work. We must just run the algorithm. That's all we need to do.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm really curious about the type token ratio in these languages as well. So for those of you who don't know, type token ratio, so types are the kind of unique number, the number of unique words in a text, and the tokens is just the number of tokens, the number of words in the text. Ali, you have a question? You have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting. I really enjoyed. I'm a little bit out of my ignorance. I'm asking. So so stylometry. You are mentioning a kind of comparison between different works. So you can compare different works and to understand how they are relevant to each other if they are coming from one author. So I have another question here. So it's already done by a few scholars about the Quran in the Arabic holy text of Muslims. And so the question here is if this one particular text is coming from one author or several authors attributed in this work. So how we can use stylometry here, or is it possible to use the application that you're mentioning there?
Oh, yes, and that's basically what I did on the Greek New Testament is exactly the same problem. Like the Quran has many, I forgot now, it's chapters or books, and what you can do is you can break it up in different ones and just compare it to see were they different, what were they written by different people, or does it align with the general theological view that they were all written by Muhammad? It would actually try and tell you that answer. So you basically just compare different pieces or the different books of the Quran with each other and just see how similar they are.
Well, actually, I was wondering, perhaps in the same line, and thank you for that answer. So when you started explaining about stylometry, so stylometry is the different styles that the different people use to write, right? So everybody has their own way of writing a text, and you want to identify these differences, but you can do different things with this, right? So at first I thought it's trying to find out, did a certain person write a particular text? But then I started thinking, because at some point you also mentioned identifying gender or identifying age. That's more the author attribution, or not sure exactly. So it's not authorship attribution because it's not about the writing itself. It's about properties of the author. And then I was actually wondering, and I think what you're doing, but you have to correct me if I'm wrong. What you're doing is we have a number of texts, a collection of texts, and we want to see which of these texts are written by the same author.
Yes.
Which is different from I'm giving you a text and I'm asking you who wrote this particular text.
Menu, exactly right. It's actually two different things, and I've mixed the two up there. So if you take the example of the Afrikaans corpus and the Federalist Papers and J.K. Rowling, we have a corpus which we know was written by somebody, and then there's a text that we're not sure it was written by that person, and then we compare that. So that is the one way. The example of the Greek New Testament just takes it one step further, where we actually don't know the author, but we start comparing different subsets of that. And if we see two subsets of 20 or 30 books go together, we can start assuming it could be done by the same author. So it is definitely two different things.
Yeah, cool. No, that sounds good. Not sure if there are any other questions. I mean, I still have a few questions. I mean, I know I've been talking with Josef for a while now, and it's easy to talk for hours. Ali, you have another question?
Yeah, I just kind of follow up to my previous question. So, and also relevant what Miro already said. So it's not only about the author, but also the properties of the author. So, and for the text like the Quran, I mean, the traditional says that it is created through a long period of time, something like 20 years. So usually you suppose that the person also developed the language, the styles, and so we have also a kind of alternative understanding of these differences in chapters, that it's because of the development of the time. So how stylometry could help us here, or still the application that you are mentioning is helpful for recognizing this kind of development?
I don't think it would help you because all that Burrows Delta does, it looks at the frequency of words. So if the author had some growth and started to write very differently. So for example, my writing at 18 is not the same as my writing now. And it won't pick that up because it just looks at vocab. And what a lot of people are saying is vocab is not good enough for all of this type of stuff. We must use these principal component and analysis or different things in machine learning to bring in many more variables like time and all of that. So you're very right, is when there's a difference in time, it makes things difficult because Burrows Delta is very simple. It is just counting the number of the top 50 or 100 words being used and comparing it. So if there's growth in the author or something, you're not going to pick that up. Or you're going to pick it up and it would say it's two different authors. And that's where, by the way, why you also need theory is because if you're just somebody who sees that and say, okay, this book in the Quran has not been written by Muhammad because look, the Burrows Delta score is different. You still need a qualitative side, which would argue it's 20 years later, different city, was different written in different place or whatever, and that could have affected it. So you cannot, and please do not just look at an algorithm or statistics and think that will give you a answer. You actually need to take all the evidence, sit back, smoke a cigar, and say, how does all of this fit together? I would say stylometry is one piece of the puzzle. It's not the whole puzzle.
Thanks. I think that's an important important aspect. Yeah, I see there's a completely different question asking about software. So for low resource languages, would you suggest Stylo for R, or would you suggest any other software methodology?
So that's an incredibly good question. And one on my bucket list is to do R this year. I've been trained as a computer scientist, so we never do R. We do C++, Python, all of it. So I cannot talk about on Stylo for R. I know Jacques Savoy used it for all of his Burrows Delta things. I used normal Python, and there's a couple of libraries out for that. I think the problem which you sit with in software is now you want to do Burrows Delta or Larbe distances or whatever, and you Google it, you'll find a GitHub repository or something where somebody has actually implemented it. So, and that's maybe a word of encouragement. If you're not strong technically, you will almost always find a algorithm or something that somebody has already implemented, which you can just reuse. So with maybe 2 or 3, okay, maybe that's a bit short. Let's say you've done a bit of a week training on Python, you can do everything which I spoke about now. And I'm very sure that in R, it would be even simpler. And I know Savoy told me, and Menno told me, R is just, you just load the data frame, you run the thing, and it generates a visualization or something. So my view is start with R, or if you feel slightly stronger, do it in Python. But all of these algorithms are available as functions you can just call. So you don't have to do the maths for any of this, which should motivate you that this is actually easier research than what you think.
Thanks. That's very encouraging. And I fully support that. I see Johannes also has a question. He says, I wonder how much difference editing or editors make in the authorship attribution. I'm not sure exactly, Johannes, what kind of editor you mean. Do you mean like an editor while typing on a computer, or somebody editing the text afterwards?
Hi, Prof. I have one. I mean a person, because sometimes you find that they change most of the text, so it doesn't sound like you writing anymore. It sounds like it is written by someone else. So I was wondering if that makes a lot of difference.
So if you use the same editor across all of your works, it wouldn't make a difference. If you use a different one, yes, it may, because it, again, Burrows Delta is not clever. It just looks at frequency of words being used.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So what about translations then? So you were working on, say, ancient Greek. What if we now use, say, English translations of these texts? So the translator might have an influence, right? Or if it's a group of translators, what would that do?
I'm very sure it would change. Again, it depends on the, what do they call it? The range of translation. If you take a word like love, in how many ways Greek has about 4 words for love. If you translate it straight to English, either as charity or love or romantic love, there's going to be differences. So I think it depends on the expressiveness of the language. And again, that's where you need to sit back and consider it. I know they've done all of the stylometry on the King James Version of the New Testament, and it came out as the same as the Greek one. So I think, yeah, I would think translation plays a big role. But more importantly is the expressiveness of the language.
Oh, I think that's pretty cool. I need to look into that as well. I see Tanya has a question. Do you think stylometry will keep on working in the age of ChatGPT and AI-generated text?
For
That's
sure.
actually quite interesting.
Yeah, I would say for sure. And I think it actually would work better because I think with ChatGPT, the richness of the language is actually more limited because it works on the averages of the amount of words being used. So Burrows Delta would work very well on ChatGPT because I think the richness of the vocab is probably less in ChatGPT than if a human would do it. But it's a guess. It's a total guess. And that's why all of this would be great research. Stylometry is a very new field. So there's a lot you can do on that. So it is a bit of the Wild West currently.
Thanks. I'm not sure if there are any other questions. I don't see anything in the chat, I think. There's a new... Yeah, ChatGPT kind of normalizes everything, right? Because it's everything thrown together. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, that's an interesting one. Do you think it could be used to detect plagiarism?
For sure. But I think there's better methods for that. But I don't know what that better methods are. I just know that the plagiarism detectors are quite good. So I think it could be used, but would it make a big difference? I don't know. But for plagiarism, if, for example, and one of my students actually his research topic was going to be plagiarism, but because you need to have a corpus of that student's other writing. So I need to look at 3 or 4 of his other assignments just to get a sense of his vocabulary usage, then compare the new one to that. So, and it just becomes more difficult. So yes, you can. I'm not sure, and I might be totally wrong. I'm not sure Burrows Delta is the best way to do that. But I don't know. I'm not the expert on plagiarism.
Okay, thanks. I don't see any other questions at the moment. In that case, I would really like to thank you. Oh, Ali, just at the moment,
if you
I
have
was going
time.
to say thank you. No, we still have a few more minutes. Please go ahead.
Just the last question. So there is another application. It's called Reuse, and it's also used by people in Islamic digital humanities. So they try to apply it on several texts through time to understand how the text is. I mean, the earlier text are used in later texts, so kind of reuse of previous existing literature in later literature. So is there is a kind of relevancy here to see not on I mean, it's not anymore kind of authorship, but it's a appearance of previous texts in later text, how it's...
Ali, that's a very good question. There's actually most of the work I see these days happening in this field is people digitizing corpuses. So you can, for example, find these days almost the whole of the ancient Greek corpus already digitized, but also even one step firmer, grammatically analyzed. So you get every word where they tell you this is a verb, a noun, what tense it is, what everything it is. And they use stemmers and all of that for it. And I think that's where a lot of people are doing groundbreaking work, is digitizing all of those type of things, which people then like us can use to test our. So for example, I can take that Jude book in the New Testament and compare it to all of these other corpuses using Burrows Delta, because maybe one of those authors did the same. So access to these things, and there's actually a couple of databases with that. That's very good. And I'm very encouraged that Islam and all of those things have the same. So it's not necessarily a religious thing. It is just different languages and different cultures who digitize these things. So yes, there's lots of them available. And again, I don't know what's in South Africa, to be honest, on our indigenous languages. But
Yeah,
very
I think
good.
that is something we need to find out. So there are data collections actually available on the Saddler website, the Saddler repository. So that might be something for people to look at as well if they want to start playing with this. I see we still have 3 more minutes, and I see there was one question from Mahmoud. How does this fit into the processing of tone languages?
I have no idea, to be honest. I can't see Burrows Delta doing anything on tone languages unless you probably codify the tone in a certain way, or give it a value. I think it's possible. I just never thought of it. Many told me you can do it with music, for example. So I'm sure you can do some of this for a tonal language as well. But I haven't done it, but it could be very interesting.
Again, open questions. Okay, I think I'll thank you very much, Ali, for giving that link. I think we can nicely wrap this up at the moment. Thank you very much, Joseph, for a very interesting presentation. I really like that we had a lot of time for questions and discussions. And I hope that the people are now enthusiastic to also start working in the field. I think it's a relatively easy field to get into, and then you'll see all the problems that you can still tackle. But thank you so much for the presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Okay. Thank you, and thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you so much, and enjoy your time in Cape Town.
I'll try my best.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.